Welcome to our second chapter's mini lecture here on the geographies of cultural difference, the subtitle of Mini Worlds. We can begin to wonder why we're speaking of more than one geography. Why are there geographies of cultural difference? The plural form here emphasizes that there is no single way of seeing or experiencing place and landscape. Different meanings that people give to places in landscape become very important. To speak of geographies raises new questions about these different meanings, such as how they relate to the sense of self and belonging, and how in multicultural societies do we deal with these different meanings politically and socially. Very important questions for nowadays. And we can begin to look at these mini cultures by first taking a look at both the material and then also the non-material culture. So all the physical, tangible objects such as clothing, buildings, tools, instruments, big part of music. And then also the non-material culture, the wide range of tales, songs, lore, beliefs, values, and especially customs that pass from generation to generation, either as part of an oral or more commonly in today's society, part as a written tradition. Would you eat these? Food preferences are strong markers of cultural difference. These water beetles are a common food source in Southeast Asia. Perhaps some of you have tried them. One of the big subcultural groups that we can begin to focus on within the geographies of culture is folk culture. Folk refers to often the rural, unified, largely self-sufficient groups that share similar customs and ethnicity. Many items of daily use, such as clothing, furniture, housing, are handmade, and most of the food is grown and consumed locally. So the Amish of different parts of the Northeast in the U.S. would be a great example of folk culture. Here's a traditional folk dance, the Schulplatte originally of Germany. The revival of such traditional folk dances by urban educated classes has been important to the formation of modern national identities, both in Bavaria and here in the US as well. Next subcultural group to take a look at is the indigenous culture. This refers to a cultural group that constitutes the original inhabitants of a territory. Within the Bay Area, this would be the Pomo Native American peoples, or just north of us, the coastal Miwok. Just to the east of us in the Sierra Nevada, the interior Miwok people. These are distinct from a dominant national culture. In today's society, that's the WASP peoples, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant dominant culture of North America, population-wise, that is, which is often derived from colonial occupation. Indigenous culture is generally associated with non-urban rural spaces, particularly the isolated forest and mountain ranges of the world. In effect, people who were colonized mostly but not exclusively by European cultures are now the minorities in their homelands. Likewise, the people of northern Thailand here, the Karen, are the minority compared to the Thai people. So here you see some of the traditional indigenous practices of weaving for their roof thatching. The Karen are a minority amongst the Thai majority within Thailand, but also in Burma as well. And then thirdly, we need to look at the most predominant subcultural group now, pop culture. Modern ways of life associated with the rise of mass-produced, machine-made goods and the invention of long-distance communication technologies. These have a huge effect on shaping cultural preference and defining cultural identity. So it can also be just characterized by placelessness. This diminishes regional variation and eliminates unique meanings associated with specific locations. It's a big part of pop culture is placelessness. For example, musician Kanye West and Jay-Z at the American Airlines here in Miami. Lot of rap, hip hop, pop culture, music spans many different genres. Characteristics would be that people are more mobile, less likely to live in a single place. Secular institutions of authority become increasingly important, such as colleges, high schools. Individual choice is highly valued, and relationships become stretched across time and space as well. So to begin to look at these mini geographies, and subcultural groups, and worlds of difference through the 5 lenses, the 5 themes of geography, we'll first look at region. A great example of this is ice hockey here in the US. And the vast majority of sports sponsored by the NCAA have distinctive regional associations. Sometimes these can be traced back to folk traditions. So touching on some of our subcultural groups of folk here. Ice hockey is concentrated in the northeastern states, originally emerged in eastern Canada in the 19th century, dating back to the stick and ball games of indigenous peoples, particularly lacrosse, combined with the winter folk traditions imported from Europe. So here you see strong regional concentration in the northeast, northern Midwest as well, suggesting an ice hockey core region. Indigenous culture regions we can also look at through the regional lens. In many cases, indigenous people fled or were forcibly removed by central governments into environmentally marginal regions. You could think of how that, just as in your piece of paper has a margin, environmentally marginalized refers to being pushed to the edges. Mountainous areas, semi-arid regions, large expanses of forest and wetlands are some places where we can think of generalized regions where indigenous people are still existing, still maintaining, in some cases, vibrant livelihoods. Within the case of the US, here's a map of indigenous Native American populations. See some strong regional concentrations in northeastern Arizona, Alaska as well, and then some other areas here and there. It's interesting to look at northwestern California and the high population within Del Norte and Humboldt County compared to eastern US. And then looking through the lens of mobility, our second theme of geography, we can begin to look at the identity in diaspora culture. Diaspora means branching out. You might think of the similarity with die and bi, as far as bicycle, this splitting. By definition, they're born of mobility. The Civil War and international armed conflicts over the past 2 generations have sent millions of people into motion around the world. This has created many new diaspora cultures. The newest is South Sudan became the newest nation state in 2011, and the diaspora community debated what a new nation should be and what it would mean, especially culturally, to be a South Sudanese citizen. Here you see them celebrating their independence in the capital city of Juba on July 9th in 2011. So there are also barriers to keep in mind to information mobility. Mass media creates the potential for almost instant diffusion. However, there's a large pattern of a digital divide still affecting the world. This can be thought of as the unequal access to advanced information technologies produced by socioeconomic inequalities, measured at scales ranging from individual to countries and world regions. So you see that mapped out across the world here with, in terms of number of internet users, in this case per 100 people. So you see strong access across North America and Australia, then areas such as Mongolia or India, much less so. This sums up the digital divide very well. Along those lines, globalization has a big part of understanding cultural variance across space, geographies of culture. We can begin to look at the spanning from difference to convergence. Globalization is most directly and visibly at work in popular culture. For a long time, most social scientists assumed that the result of globalizing forces and trends, especially mobility, electronic media, would be homogenization, making the same. However, we're beginning to see a lot more differences among places, leading to the convergence hypothesis, wherein differences among places are reduced or eliminated. In fact, geographer Peter Jackson, the book points out, globalization is not an all-powerful force. People in different places respond in different ways, some rejecting outright what globalization brings while transforming and absorbing other aspects. So rather than one homogeneous globalized culture, he sees it as multiple local consumption cultures. So distinct consumption practices here and preferences in food, clothing, music, formed in specific places and historical moments. So you can even see these on a smaller level than the national or regional. Right within the Bay Area, you see many different distinct consumption practices. We can also begin to see how there's resistance in some areas against mass consumption, globalized culture. Here, the residents protesting against Pepsi in India. Highly visible global brands such as Pepsi are often targeted outside of the US because of their representation of foreign intrusion. Here as well, a group of indigenous Filipino women participating in the opening of the Forum for Indigenous People at the Casa de la Cultura in Cancun during the World Trade Organization. So indigenous peoples from around the world organized the forum as a counterpoint to the WTO talks. And looking at our fourth theme of nature culture, we begin to understand how indigenous people often occupy territories of high biodiversity, the biological diversity of the entire living world. That's how we can most basically think of biodiversity. There's a close geographic correspondence between indigenous territories and tropical rainforests in Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Although multinational biotech companies are looking to the tropics for genetic resources, so indigenous people are often vocal about proprietary rights over the biodiversity of their homelands, rightfully so. Here this map points out this global congruence among cultural and biological diversity. Often many conservation groups are aware of this, and there's significant efforts underway towards cultural preservation in combination with biological preservation. So nature and popular culture, begin to see how pop culture is less directly tied to the physical environment because of the mobility, speed, placelessness. Because popular culture is tied to so much mass consumption, it can have enormous environmental impacts. Also, popular culture makes heavy demands on ecosystems, as we're seeing play out widely on the global scale. We carry our popular culture with us into vacation, and this picture sums that up well with the traffic jams in Yosemite Valley. Maybe some of you have been there in the summer, been exhausted by the mass crowds. And the fifth theme of geography to bring to understanding the cultures of difference, geographies of culture, cultural landscape, especially folk architecture, structures built by members of a folk society or culture in a traditional manner. In the US and Canada, we can begin to see how folk architecture today is almost a relic, although some places can still provide a sense of those past. The chapter has these great representations of different folk houses, especially in the northeast of the US, and then also folk architecture around the world, such as this in the Philippines or South Africa here on the right. Landscapes of consumption are important to keep in mind. Pop culture has been commonly associated with mass-produced suburban homes. So I'm going to submit some questions about this below.